I remember the day that changed my perspective on cars forever. I was at a garage on the outskirts of town when a 1997 Toyota Camry pulled in that looked like it had lived 3 lives. The owner brought it in for a simple oil change, and when the mechanic checked the odometer, he was nearly shocked. 850,000 kilometers. Not 80,000. Not 150,000. 850,000. The engine ran like a Swiss watch. No exhaust smoke. No strange vibrations. I asked the owner what his secret was, expecting to hear about some magic additive or special modification. His answer was so simple it baffled me. Routines. Small routines that he never, ever skipped. That day I understood something fundamental. A car's extreme longevity isn't a matter of luck or brand. It's pure driver discipline. Today you're going to discover 20 specific, verifiable habits applicable to any vehicle. These aren't theories or vague tips. They're the same practices that have allowed ordinary cars to cover extraordinary distances. And I'll tell you in advance that the last 5 on this list are the ones that the fewest people know about, but the ones that have the greatest impact in separating a car that dies prematurely from one that seems immortal. Avoid aggressive starts on a cold engine. This is probably the most common mistake even experienced drivers make. The scene is classic. You start the car, turn it on, and hit the accelerator before the engine has reached its operating temperature. It seems harmless, but it's one of the most destructive habits there is. When the engine is cold, the oil has the consistency of thick honey. It doesn't flow freely. It doesn't instantly reach all the critical components, and most importantly, it doesn't form that protective film that prevents metal-to-metal contact. During the first 30 seconds after starting, the engine experiences the most wear. It will suffer all day. Moving parts rub against each other with minimal protection, generating friction and heat that, although you don't notice it immediately, adds up to cumulative damage. Now imagine that scenario, but add aggressive acceleration. You're forcing pistons, connecting rods, bearings and valves to work at high speed without proper lubrication. It's like asking an athlete to run a marathon without warming up. Something is going to break eventually. I've known mechanics who've opened engines with barely 100,000 kilometers and found scored cylinder walls, worn rings and damaged bearings, all because the driver was in a hurry every morning. The correct practice is so simple that it's frustrating so few people follow it. Start the engine, wait 20 to 30 seconds for the oil to circulate minimally, and then drive extremely smoothly for the first 2 or 3 kilometers. Preventative transmission fluid changes. There's a dangerously widespread myth that transmission fluid is practically eternal. Many drivers never touch it because the manufacturer says it's lifetime fill, and since the fluid remains red and doesn't smell particularly bad, they assume everything is fine. Nothing could be further from the truth. Inside an automatic transmission, a complex mechanical ballet takes place. Clutches engaging and disengaging thousands of times, planetary gears rotating at different speeds, hydraulic valves moving with millimeter precision. All these components release tiny metallic particles with normal use. These microscopic particles become suspended in the fluid, gradually turning it into a kind of liquid sandpaper that circulates throughout the system. The problem is that this deterioration is silent and invisible. You don't notice dramatic changes in the transmission's behavior until it's too late. One day the transmission starts slipping when shifting gears, or it makes a strange noise, or it simply stops shifting properly. And when you reach that point, there's no going back. A transmission rebuild can cost between 4,000 and 7,000 euros, depending on the model. It's one of the most expensive repairs after replacing the entire engine. The solution is so simple it's almost absurd that not everyone does it. Change the fluid every 60,000 miles, approximately 96,000 kilometers, or every 6 years, whichever comes first. In hybrid vehicles, where the transmission works differently, that interval can be extended to 90,000 miles. Keep your fuel tank above a quarter full. This habit sounds excessive until you understand the mechanics behind it. The fuel pump is located inside the tank, submerged in gasoline. Why? Because the fuel acts as a coolant. The pump generates heat as it operates, pumping fuel under pressure to the engine thousands of times a day. When the tank level is low, the pump is partially exposed to the air, working hot without the cooling effect of the surrounding fuel. This constant overheating drastically reduces its lifespan. But there's more. At the bottom of any tank, no matter how clean it may seem, sediment accumulates over time. These are microscopic particles of dirt, rust, condensation, and fuel residue that build up year after year. When you drive with a low tank, the pump starts drawing fuel directly from this dirty bottom. These impurities circulate throughout the system. They pass through the fuel filter, clogging it prematurely. They reach the injectors, obstructing their fine nozzles, and in extreme cases, they can even damage the pump itself from the inside. I have changed fuel pumps in cars with barely 80,000 kilometers, because their owners had the habit of constantly driving with the needle on reserve, clean battery terminals regularly. There's something ironic about one of the simplest maintenance habits also being one of the most ignored. Battery terminals are the connection point between stored energy and the entire electrical system of the car. When they corrode, and eventually they will, they act as an electrical resistance that impedes the proper flow of current. That white or greenish sulfate that forms around the terminals isn't just unsightly, it's an effective insulator. Electricity has to struggle to pass through that layer of corrosion, which generates heat, voltage drop, and overloads the alternator. The alternator, which would normally work effortlessly keeping the battery charged, suddenly has to work twice as hard to compensate for the resistance at the terminals. This extra stress shortens the life of the alternator, which is an expensive part to replace. The battery also suffers because it doesn't receive a full charge, which degrades it faster. And the starter motor has to work with less voltage than necessary, making it spin slower and putting unnecessary strain on it. This whole domino effect can lead to costly misdiagnoses. I've seen cases where the customer was willing to pay €900 for a new starter motor, when the real problem was simply corrosion on the terminals. 5 minutes of cleaning would have solved everything. Never ignore dashboard lights. The instrument panel is literally your car's way of talking to you. Every light that comes on is a coded message, a warning designed to get you to act before a minor problem becomes a catastrophe. But there's a worrying tendency among drivers to simply ignore those lights as long as the car keeps moving. The check engine light is the most infamous. It can indicate anything from a dirty oxygen sensor, which costs €50 to fix, to a serious fuel injection system failure that can cost thousands. Ignoring it for weeks or months, thinking that if the car is running, it's fine, is like ignoring a high fever thinking that if you can still walk, it's not serious. The problem silently worsens until it suddenly stops being silent. The temperature light is another one you absolutely cannot ignore for a second. If it comes on while you're driving, it means the engine is overheating. Continuing to drive can warp the aluminum cylinder head in minutes, destroy the head gasket, and basically ruin the entire engine. I've seen cases where drivers ignored the light thinking it was a faulty sensor, only to discover later that they had a coolant leak and continued until the engine catastrophically overheated. Respect vehicle load limits. Every car has a maximum load capacity specified by the manufacturer. This is calculated so that the structure, suspension, brakes, and engine can safely handle that weight without excessive wear. But the reality is that many drivers use their cars as mobile warehouses, constantly carrying more weight than recommended without even realizing it. Open the average trunk and you'll find tools that are never used, boxes of forgotten items, luggage that's been there for months, toys of children who are no longer children. All that extra weight adds up. Every additional 50 kilos forces the engine to work harder to move the car, especially during acceleration and uphill climbs. This translates into higher fuel consumption, higher operating temperatures, and more wear on internal components. The suspension suffers because it's designed to withstand a specific weight range. Constantly overloading it causes premature fatigue of shock absorbers, springs, and bushings. The brakes also work under overload because they have to stop more mass, generating more heat and wearing down pads and discs faster. Drive within the optimal RPM range. If you look at your tachometer, you've probably noticed a differently marked zone, sometimes in green. This range isn't just for show. It represents the point where the engine operates at peak efficiency, optimal combustion, minimal wear, and the best balance between power and fuel consumption. For most modern engines, this range is between 1,500 and 2,500 revolutions per minute. Constantly driving outside this zone, either above or below, puts the engine under unnecessary stress. Aggressive acceleration, taking the engine to high RPM ranges unnecessarily, generates elevated temperatures, extreme pressures on internal components, and accelerated wear of pistons, connecting rods, valves, and bearings. But the opposite extreme is equally damaging. Driving at excessively low RPMs, what we call lugging, stresses the engine in a different but destructive way. Imagine trying to climb a hill in fifth gear at 40 kilometers per hour. The engine vibrates, groans, and the RPMs are so low that combustion is inefficient. What seems like smooth driving is actually torture for the crankshaft, which has to move the entire weight of the car with minimal inertia. Check alignment every 10,000 kilometers. Wheel alignment is one of those maintenance tasks that most people postpone until the car literally pulls to one side or the steering wheel vibrates uncontrollably. But waiting until that point already means you've accumulated months of unnecessary wear and tear. When a car is misaligned, even slightly, the tires don't roll perpendicular to the ground or parallel to each other. This creates constant resistance, as if you were dragging the tires sideways with every meter you travel. The consequences are numerous and costly. Tires wear extremely unevenly, with one side losing tread much faster than the other. This cuts their lifespan in half or more. But the damage doesn't stop there. This additional resistance forces the engine to work harder to move the same weight, increasing fuel consumption. The constant, albeit subtle vibrations are transmitted throughout the suspension, prematurely wearing out shock absorbers, bushings, ball joints, and mounts. The steering wheel needs constant correction to keep the car straight, which puts stress on the steering box and power steering pump. Over time, these microscopic vibrations loosen bolts, fatigue components, and cause the entire car to age faster than normal. The solution is to have the alignment checked every 10,000 kilometers or after any hard impact with curbs or deep potholes. The process takes less than an hour and costs between 50 and 100 euros depending on the garage. Address noises immediately. Cars communicate their problems long before they completely fail. Every strange noise is a conversation your vehicle is trying to have with you. A high-pitched squeal when starting usually signals an auxiliary belt that's drying out and about to break. A rhythmic knocking sound when going over bumps indicates worn shock absorbers or suspension mounts. A constant whine that increases with speed reveals a failing wheel bearing. A metallic click when turning points to troublesome CV joints. Each of these sounds is a specific warning that, if addressed early, costs little to fix. But there's a fatal mistake too many drivers make: turning up the radio to drown out the noise. It's like covering your ears while your car screams for help. Ignoring noises allows small problems to escalate into costly catastrophes. And if these first 10 habits have already shown you how much control you have over your car's longevity, get ready, because what comes next is different. The following 10 habits are the secrets that truly separate average drivers from those who understand that a car can be an investment for decades. Change filters before they become clogged. Filters are the silent guardians that keep every system in your car running. They don't make noise, they don't trigger any warning lights, and that's why most people ignore them for years. But a clogged filter is like a blocked artery. It forces the entire system to work harder until something fails. The air filter is the first and most visible. When it's clogged, the engine literally chokes, trying to draw in the oxygen needed for combustion. To compensate for this lack of air, the computer injects more fuel than necessary, creating a rich mixture that doesn't burn completely. This incomplete combustion generates soot that it sticks to pistons, valves, and combustion chambers. Over time, this buildup steals power so gradually that you don't notice it until you compare it to how the car accelerated when it was new. The oil filter is equally critical, but invisible in its operation. A clogged filter allows microscopic metal particles to circulate freely around the engine, acting like sandpaper on bearings, camshafts, and cylinder walls. Every revolution of the engine with dirty oil means cumulative wear that will eventually result in loss of compression, oil consumption, and internal noises. Wash the undercarriage and chassis monthly. Corrosion is the most silent and treacherous killer in the automotive world. It makes no noise, doesn't trigger warning lights, and doesn't generate vibrations. It simply advances millimeter by millimeter, month after month, devouring the metal from below while the driver doesn't even suspect anything is wrong. By the time you notice the first visible hole, the car's structure has already been irreversibly compromised. This is especially critical in areas where salt is used on the roads during the winter. That salt mixed with moisture creates the perfect environment for accelerated oxidation. But you don't need to live in a cold climate to suffer from corrosion. Coastal areas with constant salty humidity, industrial regions with chemical pollutants in the air, or simply normal humidity combined with accumulated dirt can start the process. Most drivers only wash the exterior of the car to make it shine, completely ignoring the most vulnerable part, the undercarriage and chassis. That's where mud, salt, chemicals and water accumulate and never fully dry. Wheel wells are particularly susceptible because they constantly retain moisture. Always use the parking brake when parking. This is probably the most underrated habit of all, and also the one that generates the most absurd repair bills. Most drivers with automatic transmissions think that putting the lever in P is enough to keep the car stopped. But what they don't understand is that P doesn't magically lock the wheels. What it does is engage a small metal tooth called the parking pawl in a gear of the transmission. That tiny piece of metal, about the size of your pinky finger, is the only thing preventing the car from rolling. Now imagine parking on a slope without using the parking brake. The entire weight of the vehicle, sometimes more than 1,500 kilos, rests on that small metal component. The pressure is brutal. Over time, that tooth wears down, bends, or even breaks. And when that happens, the transmission needs to be opened and partially rebuilt. A repair that can easily cost between 2,000 and 3,000 euros. The irony is that the habit that prevents this costs absolutely nothing. It's simply a matter of changing the order of operations. First you engage the parking brake, then you put the lever in P, in that order. The parking brake supports the weight of the car, and P acts only as a secondary backup. Some drivers argue that it's not necessary on flat ground. They're wrong. Change your oil based on your driving habits, not just mileage. Blindly following the manufacturer's manual intervals without considering how you actually drive is a common mistake that dramatically shortens engine life. Manufacturers set intervals based on ideal conditions, mostly highway driving, moderate temperatures, and quality fuel. But the reality for most is very different. An engine that primarily makes short city trips degrades its oil much faster than one that travels on highways for hours. Why? Because in the city the engine starts cold, travels only a few kilometers without reaching full operating temperature, and then shuts off. This constantly repeated cycle causes the oil to accumulate condensation, unburned fuel, and contaminants that would normally evaporate at a stable temperature. The oil degrades chemically, loses viscosity, and its additives are depleted prematurely. In contrast, an engine that is driven on the highway quickly reaches its optimal temperature and maintains it throughout the entire trip. The oil operates within its ideal range, contaminants evaporate, and combustion is more complete. That oil can last considerably longer. The rule of thumb for experienced drivers is to adjust intervals according to actual use. Every 5,000 kilometers if your driving is mainly urban with short journeys, every 7,000 kilometers if it is mixed between city and highway, and every 10,000 only if you constantly drive on the highway with the engine reaching full operating temperature on each use. Never overfill the tank after the pump clicks. You've probably thought at some point that giving the pump a couple of extra squeezes after the automatic click gets you more gas for your money. It seems logical. If it holds more, why not fill it up? But this seemingly harmless little gesture is actually poison for your car's emissions system. The fuel tank isn't designed to be filled completely to the brim. It needs some empty space at the top to allow gasoline vapors to circulate to the EVAP system. This system is specifically designed to capture and process vapors, not liquid fuel. When you insist on filling beyond the automatic click, you're forcing liquid gasoline into hoses and components designed exclusively to handle vapor. The result is multifaceted and costly. Liquid fuel floods the EVAP system's hoses, reaches and floods delicate sensors, and worst of all, completely destroys the carbon canister. This component contains activated carbon that absorbs fuel vapors. When liquid reaches it, it becomes permanently saturated and stops working. The car starts generating error codes related to the emissions system. The check engine light comes on, and eventually you need to replace the entire canister. Check your tire pressure weekly. This habit seems excessive until you understand the real impact tire pressure has on your entire vehicle. It's not just a matter of tire wear or fuel consumption. It directly affects the health of the engine, suspension, brakes, and virtually every mechanical system in the car. When tires are underinflated, rolling resistance increases dramatically. This means the engine has to generate more power to move the same weight at the same speed. This extra effort translates into higher operating temperatures, more internal wear on components, and increased fuel consumption that can reach up to 15%. It's like forcing the engine to constantly drag an invisible anchor. The suspension also suffers because underinflated tires don't absorb impacts properly, transmitting more shock to the shock absorbers, springs, and bushings. The brakes work less efficiently because the tire's contact patch with the road isn't optimal, increasing braking distances. And of course, the tires themselves wear extremely unevenly, creating smooth areas and vibrations that prematurely age the entire car. The correct tire pressure is specified on a sticker, usually located on the driver's side door frame or fuel filler door. It's absolutely critical to check the pressure when the tires are cold before driving, because temperature significantly affects pressure. A tire that seems fine when warm may be underinflated when cold. The habit that makes a difference is checking the pressure weekly with a reliable tire pressure gauge. It literally takes 5 minutes to check all 4 tires. Some drivers do it every time they fill up with gas, making it an automatic ritual. Preventative engine mount replacement. Most drivers believe that engine mounts are practically indestructible parts that never need attention. That's a costly mistake. Mounts not only hold the engine in position within the engine bay, they also absorb the massive vibrations generated by combustion and protect the chassis from those constant internal shocks. They are made of metal and rubber specifically designed to flex thousands of times a day while isolating vibrations. Over time, that rubber hardens, cracks, and loses its ability to absorb vibrations. When the mounts fail, the engine literally begins to dance within the engine compartment. At first, it seems like just a slightly stronger vibration in the steering wheel or a small knocking sound when starting or shifting into first gear. But what's really happening is much more serious. The entire engine and transmission assembly begins to move excessively, stressing components that were never designed for that freedom of movement. The exhaust receives impacts that can break it. The radiator suffers vibrations that can crack its seals. The transmission becomes misaligned, causing uneven wear, and the hoses stretch beyond their intended limits. It's a domino effect of secondary damage that can cost thousands of euros to repair. I've seen extreme cases where the engine was practically resting on the chassis because the main mount was completely destroyed. The owner thought the excessive vibration was normal in an old car, seeking a second opinion for urgent repairs. This habit isn't directly related to the car itself, but rather to how you interact with repair shops. And it's crucial because one of the reasons so many cars fail prematurely is that their owners spend fortunes on unnecessary repairs while ignoring the truly important ones. The scene is classic. You take your car in for a routine oil change, and the service advisor returns with a list of urgent repairs that sounds like an emergency room report. You need injector cleaning, a transmission flush, fluid changes you didn't even know existed, replacement of parts with impossible names. All presented with fear-mongering language. Your car could break down at any moment. It's dangerous to keep driving like this. This should have been done a long time ago. The reality is that many repair shops, especially dealerships, train their advisors in aggressive sales techniques. They don't necessarily lie, but they exaggerate the urgency of maintenance that can wait or outright recommend unnecessary services. I've seen absurd cases like recommending a transmission flush on a car with barely 20,000 kilometers, when that service is rarely needed before 80,000 or 100,000. Or injector cleaning on a perfectly functioning car. The habit that protects you is simple. Never accept an urgent repair estimate without a second opinion. If a garage says something is wrong, ask for concrete proof. Photos of the damaged component, measurement results, specific error codes. An honest garage has no problem showing evidence. Scheduled preventative maintenance without excuses. This is the ultimate habit, the one that truly separates ordinary cars from those that become rolling legends. There is no magic engine, no perfect brand, No legendary manufacturing if behind it there isn't a disciplined driver who religiously adheres to maintenance. Cars that reach 800,000 kilometers or more have something in common. Their owners don't wait for the car to show signs of needing maintenance. They perform it before it even needs it. They have a maintenance schedule that they treat like a sacred Bible. Oil changes are done on schedule, even if they haven't reached the recommended mileage. Scheduled checkups are performed without delay, not even a month, even if the car is running perfectly. The timing belt is changed before the maximum limit, never at the limit, and certainly not after. Spark plugs are replaced preventively at the established intervals. Fluids are changed even if they appear fine at first glance. The difference in mindset is fundamental. These drivers see their car as a long-term investment, not a temporary expense. Every euro invested in prevention is a euro they won't spend on emergency repairs. And the math is brutally clear. An oil change costs 50 euros, a new engine costs 5,000. A timing belt costs 400. An engine wrecked because the belt broke costs between 5 and 8,000. Coolant costs 30. Repairing a cylinder head warped by overheating costs 3,500. Now you know the 20 habits that separate an average car from one that defies all expectations.